Okay, so you want to own a zoo. Maybe you've been to one recently. Maybe you watched the animals and thought about the ticket prices and the gift shop and the crowds. And somewhere in the back of your head, a calculation started running. $40 a ticket, thousands of people on a Saturday. A monkey eating a banana. How hard can this be? Here's the thing nobody tells you. The animals are the least of your problems. The zoo business is one of the most capital-intensive, regulatory-constrained, emotionally volatile, and operationally complex asset classes that private capital can enter. It is also, when it works, one of the most defensible local monopolies you can own, a business with no direct competition within a 50-mile radius, a customer base that pays full price for an experience they can't replicate at home, and a brand built on something that costs nothing to create and everything to keep alive: wonder. The problem is the gap between what looks like a business from the outside and what it actually costs to run from the inside. Zoos collapse not because the animals stop being interesting. They collapse because the fixed cost structure is enormous, the revenue is seasonal, the regulatory environment is unforgiving, and one bad headline can destroy a year of goodwill in 48 hours. This video is about what a zoo actually costs, what it actually earns, and why the economics of keeping a giraffe alive are more complicated than you've been led to believe. Before we go anywhere near the numbers, we need to reframe what you're actually buying. Because this reframe changes everything that comes after it. You are not buying a collection of animals. Anyone who thinks they're in the animal business is going to lose their money slowly, and then all at once. What a zoo actually sells is guilt-free wonder. It sells the specific emotional experience of standing 3 feet from a 400-kilogram Bengal tiger and feeling completely safe, and feeling good about being there, because the tiger is fed, the habitat is enriched, and a portion of your ticket is going toward wild tiger conservation in India. That's the product, not the tiger. The feeling of the tiger, delivered responsibly, in a way that satisfies the modern visitor's increasingly sophisticated ethical expectations. This distinction drives every single financial decision a zoo makes. It's why zoos spend millions on habitat naturalization that has no direct revenue impact. It's why they maintain conservation partnerships with wildlife organizations that cost money and generate almost no gate revenue. It's why a single viral video of an animal in distress can crater ticket sales for 6 months. The product isn't the animal. The product is the ethical encounter. And maintaining the perceived integrity of that encounter is the actual operating challenge of the entire business. Keep this in mind. Let's start with what it costs to get in the door. At the smallest end of the scale, a regional wildlife park covering perhaps 20 to 40 acres, with 20 to 40 species, no large megafauna, and a modest visitor infrastructure, you're looking at acquisition or construction costs in the range of $5 million to $20 million. That gets you land, basic animal housing, fencing, visitor paths, a small food and beverage operation, and a parking lot. It does not get you elephants. It does not get you a large cat enclosure that meets modern accreditation standards. And it does not get you the public trust that drives visitation. That takes years. A mid-tier regional zoo, the kind that draws 300,000 to 500,000 visitors per year, covers perhaps 50 to 100 acres, houses 150 to 300 species, has multiple themed zones, education facilities, and at least one marquee animal. Think elephant, rhino, or great ape. Building that from scratch in today's regulatory and construction environment costs between $50 million and $150 million, according to estimates from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the AZA, which is the accrediting body for professional zoos in the United States. There are currently 241 AZA-accredited institutions in the country. To achieve that accreditation, and without it you cannot participate in cooperative animal loan programs or species survival plans, which are essential to operating a serious zoo, you need to meet physical infrastructure standards that themselves run into the tens of millions. At the top of the market, the major metropolitan zoos, San Diego, Bronx, Lincoln Park, St. Louis, these are institutions with operating budgets above $100 million per year, land holdings in the hundreds of acres, and accumulated capital investment that makes them essentially impossible to replicate from scratch. The San Diego Zoo, run by the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, manages an endowment of over $1 billion and an operation spanning multiple properties. You are not building that. But the mid-tier zoo is achievable, and that's the scale where most of the interesting economics live. If you're acquiring an existing zoo rather than building, the market is thin. There aren't many for sale at any given time. But acquisition prices for operating mid-tier facilities have historically run between $20 million and $75 million for the real estate and operating assets, exclusive of the animals themselves, who are typically on loan or co-owned under conservation agreements rather than being assets in the traditional balance sheet sense. The hidden pre-opening costs are where first-time buyers learn what they didn't know. Start with USDA licensing. Any facility that exhibits warm-blooded animals to the public is required to hold an Animal Welfare Act exhibitor's license from the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS. That license requires a physical inspection, ongoing compliance with housing, feeding, veterinary care, and handling standards for every species you hold, and annual renewal fees that scale with the number of animals. Violations result in fines that start at $1,000 per incident and can reach $10,000 per day per violation for serious or repeat infractions. The licensing process itself, including facility preparation to meet APHIS standards, takes 6 to 18 months and costs between $100,000 and $500,000 in infrastructure upgrades, veterinary consultant fees, and legal review before a single visitor walks through the gate. Then there's state and local permitting. Every state has its own exotic animal regulations, and they vary enormously. Some states require additional permits for every individual animal above a certain weight or danger classification. A new lion exhibit in California, for example, requires compliance with California Department of Fish and Wildlife regulations on large carnivores, county building permits for the enclosure, environmental impact review if the facility is near a protected habitat, and fire department approval for visitor egress in an emergency. A full permitting package for a new large animal exhibit in a complex regulatory state can take 2 to 3 years and cost $500,000 to $2 million in permits, environmental review, and legal fees alone. A commercial zoo with large and dangerous animals carries multiple insurance lines: general liability, animal liability, which covers incidents involving the animals themselves, property insurance, workers' compensation for a workforce that handles potentially lethal animals daily, and directors and officers coverage for the board. Industry specialists who underwrite zoo insurance, a small and specialized market, price a mid-tier zoo's annual insurance package between $1 million and $3 million per year. For a facility with dangerous large animals, lions, bears, primates, elephants, that number sits at the higher end. And that's the annual ongoing cost. Before opening, you're also paying for construction bonding, environmental liability insurance during construction, and event liability coverage for soft opening and preview events. Total pre-revenue spend before a mid-tier zoo opens to the public. After acquisition but before Ticket 1. Industry consultants typically estimate $3 million to $8 million in regulatory, legal, licensing, and insurance costs, spread over 1 to 3 years. None of it is recoverable. All of it is a prerequisite. Now let's talk about how a zoo actually makes money, because it's more layered than the gate. The first and most obvious revenue stream is admissions. A mid-tier regional zoo charging an average ticket price of $22, blended across adults, children, and member discounts, with 350,000 annual visitors, generates approximately $7.7 million in gate revenue per year. That's the headline number. It's also the most volatile number, the most weather-dependent number, and the one most sensitive to public perception events. The second layer is membership programs. This is the revenue stream that zoo operators actually manage for. A family membership at a mid-tier zoo typically runs $120 to $180 per year and includes unlimited admission for 2 adults and their children. Families with young children will visit 4 to 6 times a year, making the membership economically rational for them at virtually any ticket price above $15. For the zoo, a family that pays $150 for a membership and visits 5 times generates $30 of admission revenue per visit in ticket equivalents. But more importantly, they generate 4 additional visits of ancillary spending: food, merchandise, parking, and premium experiences like behind-the-scenes tours. A zoo with 40,000 active family memberships is generating roughly $6 million annually in membership fees, plus an estimated $8 to $10 million in associated ancillary spending over those additional visits. The AZA reports that member families typically spend 40% more per visit than non-member families because they don't feel like they need to get their money's worth from admission and spend freely on extras. The third layer is food, beverage, and retail. At a mid-tier zoo, food and beverage revenue runs approximately $8 to $12 per visitor, and retail merchandise runs $4 to $6 per visitor. On 350,000 annual visitors, that's $4.2 to $6.3 million from food and beverage, and $1.4 to $2.1 million from retail. These numbers look good on a revenue line. The margins are less exciting. Food and beverage in a captive audience venue like a zoo typically runs 65 to 70% cost of goods and labor, leaving a 30 to 35% margin on those sales, which translates to roughly $1.5 to $2.2 million in net contribution. Retail margins are better, around 50%, but the volume is lower. Together, ancillary spending contributes perhaps $2 to $3 million to the bottom line. The fourth revenue layer is where it gets interesting for sophisticated operators: corporate sponsorship, events, and conservation grants. A mid-tier zoo with a professional development department can generate $1 to $3 million per year in corporate sponsorship. Companies paying $50,000 to $500,000 to have their name on an exhibit, an education center, or a conservation program. The elephant habitat presented by is not an accident. It's a revenue line. Private evening events, corporate dinners, wedding receptions, charity galas held after public hours generate $500,000 to $1.5 million per year at a facility with the right infrastructure, with virtually no marginal cost beyond staffing and catering. And conservation grants from foundations, federal sources through the Fish and Wildlife Service's Wildlife Conservation and Appreciation Fund, and international bodies can add $500,000 to $2 million annually for facilities with strong conservation credentials. Blending all four layers, a well-run mid-tier zoo with 350,000 annual visitors is generating total revenue in the range of $18 to $25 million per year. That's before we talk about what it costs to generate it. The fixed cost structure of a zoo is the financial trap that catches almost every new owner who didn't grow up in the industry. The animals eat whether it's raining or not. The keepers show up whether it's a Tuesday in February or a Saturday in July. The veterinary team is on call around the clock, regardless of visitor volume. The HVAC systems in tropical animal houses run continuously. The perimeter security, because the alternative is a lion on the loose and a liability claim that ends your insurance career, cannot be cycled down during slow periods. Fixed costs, in the zoo business, are not a portion of the cost structure. They are the cost structure. Let's run the numbers for a mid-tier operation. Animal care staff, keepers, curators, and veterinary team, for a 200-species collection, runs approximately 80 to 120 full-time employees. At an average fully loaded compensation of $55,000 per year, including benefits and workers' compensation, that's $4.4 to $6.6 million annually just in animal care labor. Visitor-facing staff, admissions, education, food service, retail, security, adds another 60 to 100 employees, many of them seasonal or part-time, at a fully loaded average of $38,000, adding $2.3 to $3.8 million. Total labor, $6.7 to $10.4 million per year. Animal feed and veterinary costs. A 200-species collection requires a professionally managed nutrition program. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums reports that a collection of this scale consumes approximately $800,000 to $1.5 million in feed annually. Veterinary expenses, staff salaries, pharmaceuticals, diagnostic equipment, specialist consultations, and emergency care add $600,000 to $1.2 million per year. Combined animal care operating expenses, $1.4 to $2.7 million annually. Utilities for a facility with climate-controlled animal houses, public spaces, food service operations, and outdoor lighting run $600,000 to $1.2 million per year. Facility maintenance, groundskeeping, exhibit maintenance, infrastructure repair, adds $400,000 to $800,000. Insurance, as we discussed, runs $1 to $3 million. Regulatory compliance, including USDA inspections, state licensing renewals, and legal counsel, runs $300,000 to $600,000 annually. Total fixed operating costs for a mid-tier zoo, approximately $10.4 to $18.7 million per year. That's the floor. That's what you're spending, whether you have 350,000 visitors or 150,000 visitors. The variable costs on top of that, additional seasonal labor, incremental food service supply, credit card processing fees, scale with volume. But the floor doesn't move. On revenue of $18 to $25 million against fixed costs of $10 to $18 million, the operating margin at a well-run mid-tier zoo is roughly 8 to 15%. Industry benchmarks from the AZA's annual financial survey suggest that accredited zoos as a class operate at margins between 5 and 12% in normal conditions. That's before capital expenditure, before the new exhibit that needs to be built to maintain visitor interest, before the aging animal house that needs to be replaced, before the accessibility upgrades required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. On a $60 million zoo investment generating 10% operating margin on $20 million in revenue, you're earning $2 million per year in operating income. The payback period on that capital is 30 years. 30 years, assuming nothing goes wrong. Here's where it gets interesting. And here's the structural risk that the zoo industry talks about in private, but rarely surfaces publicly. The AZA accreditation system is the backbone of the legitimate zoo industry. It's the quality standard, the brand signal, and, critically, the gateway to the species survival plans, the cooperative breeding programs that allow zoos to transfer animals between facilities without paying market prices for individual animals. A giraffe doesn't cost $60,000 when it's transferred between two AZA institutions under an SSP breeding recommendation. It costs transport fees and veterinary clearance. But AZA accreditation requires reaccreditation every 5 years, and the standards keep moving. What met the standard in 2010 may not meet the standard in 2025, particularly around exhibit space minimums, environmental enrichment requirements, and elephant management protocols, the last of which has generated some of the most expensive and contentious compliance debates in the industry. The AZA's elephant management standards, updated in 2011 and subsequently reinforced, require protected contact management protocols, minimum space requirements of 1 acre of outdoor space per elephant, and significant keeper training certification. For a zoo that built its elephant facilities in the 1980s, compliance with current standards requires reconstruction costs that routinely exceed $20 to $40 million per elephant facility. Many mid-sized zoos have faced a binary choice: spend $25 million to rebuild the elephant house, or send the elephants to a sanctuary and lose a marquee attraction that drives 15 to 20% of your ticket sales. This is the trapdoor. The accreditation standard is not fixed. It moves with scientific consensus and public ethical expectations. And because the product you're selling is guilt-free wonder, the ethical encounter, you cannot simply ignore the standard and continue operating. The moment your facility's animal welfare practices become a public controversy, the product collapses, the guilt returns, and visitors stop coming. The AZA's accreditation standard is the mechanism that transmits public ethical expectations directly into your capital expenditure budget, with a 5-year enforcement clock and no grandfather clause for legacy infrastructure. The story of the Detroit Zoo's elephant decision illustrates this mechanism with painful clarity. In 2004, the Detroit Zoological Society made a decision that was genuinely unusual for the time. They announced they were sending their 2 African elephants, Wanda and Winky, to the Paws Sanctuary in San Andreas, California. Not because of financial pressure, not because of a regulatory violation, because Zoo Director Ron Kagan, after a professional review, concluded that the Detroit Zoo's facilities could not provide an adequate environment for elephants, and that continuing to hold them would be inconsistent with the institution's stated values around animal welfare. The decision was publicly celebrated by animal welfare advocates and quietly watched by every zoo director in the country. It marked a turning point. Detroit was a credentialed, respected institution, voluntarily surrendering a marquee exhibit on ethical grounds. Within 5 years, several other zoos followed. The San Francisco Zoo sent its last elephant to an accredited sanctuary in 2004. The Los Angeles Zoo went the opposite direction. They rebuilt, spending approximately $42 million on a new Elephants of Asia habitat that opened in 2010, after years of public controversy and board debate about whether the spending was justified. The financial stakes of that decision were enormous. A major urban zoo's elephant exhibit drives not just ticket sales but donor engagement, sponsorship interest, and media coverage. The LA Zoo's $42 million commitment was essentially a bet that the ethical encounter with elephants could be maintained at a quality high enough to satisfy modern visitors, and that the financial return from doing so would justify the capital investment. The exhibit opened to strong attendance and generally positive reviews. But $42 million in capital expenditure, financed against a zoo operating at typical margins, represents approximately 20 years of operating income. That is a long time to be right about a bet. Let's run a good year and a bad year, using the mid-tier zoo we've been building through this entire analysis. In a good year, attendance reaches 380,000 visitors, driven by a new exhibit opening and favorable summer weather. Admissions generate $8.4 million. Membership revenue from 42,000 households generates $6.3 million. Ancillary spending generates $4.6 million. Corporate sponsorship, events, and grants total $2.8 million. Total revenue, $22.1 million. Operating costs come in at $14.5 million. Operating income, $7.6 million. Margin, 34%. After capital expenditure of $3 million for routine infrastructure and $1.5 million in debt service on the original acquisition financing, net income is approximately $3.1 million. In a bad year, a viral social media video in March alleges inadequate care for a sick primate. The allegation turns out to be mischaracterized, but the story runs for 2 weeks. Spring attendance drops 22% versus the prior year. A hot, wet summer keeps casual visitors away in July and August. Final attendance, 270,000. Admissions generate $5.9 million. Membership renewals dip 8%, generating $5.8 million. Ancillary spending falls proportionally to $3.3 million. One corporate sponsor pauses a $200,000 commitment pending resolution of the animal welfare story. Events revenue holds. Total revenue, $16.5 million. Fixed operating costs don't move, $14 million. Operating income, $2 million. Margin, 12%. After the same capital expenditure and debt service of $4.5 million combined, the net result is a loss of $2.5 million. The difference between a good year and a bad year at a mid-tier zoo is $5.6 million in net outcome. One goes on the balance sheet as retained earnings. The other goes on as a draw on your line of credit. And if you don't have one or it's maxed, you start making hard decisions about capital expenditure deferrals that compound your problems the following year. So why do wealthy individuals and foundations still acquire zoos? It is almost never about operating returns. 30-year payback periods and 8 to 12% operating margins in a good year are not what drives serious money into this asset class. What drives it is mission alignment and community standing. A zoo is one of the few asset classes where a wealthy owner can operate a genuinely large, complex institution with significant community impact and do so under a nonprofit or hybrid structure that generates substantial charitable deduction value for the capital they commit. Many of America's largest zoos operate as nonprofit entities. The zoo's land is often owned by the city, and a nonprofit zoological society holds the operating license and manages the facility. A major donor contributing $10 million to build a new exhibit is getting a naming right, a community legacy, a charitable deduction, and the operational benefit of a facility improvement that drives attendance and revenue, all in one transaction. The tax efficiency of philanthropic engagement with a zoo, structured correctly, is meaningful. There is also the question of irreplaceability. A well-established zoo with AZA accreditation, a significant animal collection, a trained keeper workforce, and decades of community goodwill is not something that can be rebuilt from scratch. The barriers to entry are not primarily financial, they're temporal and relational. The AZA doesn't accredit new institutions quickly. Building a keeper team with the institutional knowledge to manage a complex collection takes 15 years. The competitive moat around an established zoo is essentially permanent, because no rational competitor is going to spend 15 years and $100 million to build a competing zoo in the same metro area. For family offices and foundations interested in durable community institutions with genuine irreplaceability and significant public good optionality, that combination is genuinely rare. It doesn't pay like a software company, but it doesn't disappear like one either. Here's where we come back to the reframe from the beginning. You are not in the animal business. You never were. The animals are the mechanism. What you're actually managing is the ongoing production of an ethical encounter, a feeling that modern visitors are increasingly demanding be delivered without compromise, without ambiguity, and without the shadow of a viral video undermining everything you've spent decades building. The financial structure of a zoo reflects this perfectly. The revenue is seasonal, concentrated in 3 summer months, and acutely sensitive to public perception. The costs are fixed, continuous, and non-negotiable. The tiger eats in January too. The capital requirements keep moving upward as standards evolve, and the bar for what constitutes an acceptable habitat rises with public expectations. And the product you're selling, that specific emotional transaction of wonder delivered responsibly, can be destabilized in 48 hours by a story on social media that may not even be accurate. What survives in this environment is not the zoo that has the most animals. It's the zoo that has built the deepest reservoir of public trust, the most credible conservation narrative, and the most authentic relationship with its community. Those are not financial metrics. They don't appear on an operating statement. But they are the actual asset, the thing that keeps the gates busy on a rainy Tuesday in October and keeps the membership renewals coming in March when nothing exciting is happening. A zoo is not a business where the animals are in cages and the visitors are free. The more you understand the economics, the more you realize it might be the other way around.